Zoom is connecting in, and we should be live shortly.
Saying it's live here now.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
We are live. Refresh the pages. Good day, everybody, and welcome to the first gathering of the Church of Diffability. Now, before we proceed any further, we are a new organization, and we will make mistakes. This is our very first meeting, and we're looking forward for you to come on this journey with us as we try to make the world a more accessible and inclusive place. Now, will we get everything correct? Probably not. Will you help us align ourselves to be more accurate? I think you should. And today, we will introduce you to some fantabulous people who will actually help you take us on this journey towards accessibility and inclusion. Now, looking forward to taking you on this journey. Let us connect a few more things and we shall begin shortly. In the meantime, I will have you introduce yourselves to the other people in this meeting. From the top left, we have Mike Rolls.
G'day, everybody.
Followed by Greg Alchin.
Hi, everyone.
Manisha down the bottom.
Hello.
And Dan Papalo. He's on mute. Let me share these events and we shall go live. Sure. Definitely. Sure. And we are live. All right. I'm excited, people. We started this on 10th of May, 2020, as we began this journey towards accessibility inclusion. It did not start there directly, but it started a long time ago. Let me just unmute a few people. Cool. So it started, we launched this church on 10th of May, 2020, Foundation Day. But the work did not begin on that day. Before we proceed any further, I have horribly forgotten something that I needed to do, and I shall do that right now. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land at which we meet. Elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal people here on our live stream and globally. We also acknowledge the work of the First Nations people across the world, and we always would like to integrate with them to ensure that we are being inclusive of all cultures. The reading of the Church of Diffability. The Diffability Creed. I am a flawed human, and I acknowledge we are all humans of various abilities. I believe that the world is a diverse place with a variety of human experiences. I believe that for the world to be inclusive and accessible, we need to uplift people with disabilities and be united in our differences. I acknowledge the experience of carers who give so much for the people they care about. I believe my thoughts and experience have value and I must help improve the world. I believe I can create an accessible, inclusive world. I believe in the Church of Diffability, its teachings on an inclusive community, its quest to improve knowledge on diffability, to improve lives with science and technology for all of humanity. So shall it be. Now, why did I create a Church of Diffability? That's been a question that has been asked to me since I started this thing back in 14th of December, 2019. And that's when I first read the Ritual Discrimination Bill and the words that could be said that could really harm the diverse community that we live in. And it felt really odd that people with disabilities would be targeted of this thing, not intentionally, because most religions don't tend to call out people with disabilities as an issue, but always as the gap, right? They always have battles with other communities. And what that does is in the gap falls the community of people with disabilities and carers and things of that like. And what that causes us to go is there is no voice that is of a religious nature that seems to stand up for a community purely about accessibility and inclusion. And I started reading text. I went and read all the major religious texts to find what each religion had to say about people with disabilities. Some was blunt as can be. You are a person with a disability because in your previous life you had bad karma. And that meant that I would not be helping you in this life because, well, you're suffering for the sins of your past. So that doesn't drive a person to make the world more inclusive and accessible. Other things were, this is a punishment from Yahweh, and therefore you have to deal with what you have to deal with. And some of them were nice and light, like you are a person with a disability because God made you so we can show our magics through you. Now, again, that does not make the world more inclusive. It makes it harder. And so with all these words written in these old religious texts, it kind of puts us on the back foot. We were the last people to think. When people think about things, they always think about religion, sex, and politics. Those are the three major topics that we always hear discussed everywhere. Disability maybe falls on fourth or fifth on everyone's radar. For a person with a disability doesn't rank that high for them either. If I'm describing myself, I'm an Indian-born Australian that loves to travel and see the world. Oh, COVID-19, what have you done? Ruined my traveling life. But that's who I am as a person. Disability just happens to be something that has occurred to me. And so the objective is to kind of even the playing field in a space that we've never evened the playing field before. And to change the culture of a community, you need to affect their belief. If people believe that they can change the community, then that's what will occur. Change will occur. And what we found is that in 85% of all cultures, religion was that key motivator. So we understand that religion over time equals belief and equals cultural change. Hence why we came on this path to create to create the Church of Diffability to help defend ourselves in the space of religious discrimination bill. The other things that we notice in the space is that our disability community, well, we've had a pretty bad go of it over the last 5 years. Now, I'm talking about the prison populations in Australia. About 50% of them are people with disabilities, when we make up only 1 in 5 people in Australia. That's odd. We also saw a lack of advocacy funding slashed quite recently. And that was a problem, because how can someone advocate for people with disabilities if they're not there? We also saw housing issues, where housing was not accessible and inclusive. And finally, the NDIS. It has some great points, but also it has a kill rate, and that's very odd. How does an agency that's supposed to be dealing with care has caused issues and because of delay in delivery of the scheme has resulted in 1,279 deaths in that space. And that's where we need to change society. Small shifts. And that's why we've created the Church of Diffability. Now, to drive real change in this place, what do we need to do? Well, we need to have a resilient heart, an inclusive mind, and to focus on the accessible future. But before anything else, I would like to call up the first watcher of the Church of Diffability, Mr. Dan Papalo. Can you hear us, Mr. Dan?
Good evening, all. How are we?
Pretty good. I would like to introduce this man. This man has done a great amount of work for this community. He has helped me tirelessly create and shoot videos. He's helped me edit a website. He's managed to coordinate and help create this place. And Dan and myself actually have a business together where we're about to start doing some good work, playing Dungeons and Dragons with people with autism to help them learn social skill sets. So this man here, is good by me. And he is our first watcher of the Church of Diffability. Are you ready to swear the oath, Dan?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Over to you, Dan.
All right. So I'm going to be reading from the ritual prayer book of the Church of Diffability. I'm going to be reading the oath of the Watcher. So the oath of the Watcher is what I swear: to run the administration with diligence and care, be bluntly honest and speak the truth, record our history, map the future too. My services and skills are what I give to thee to grow this beautiful diffability community. My judgment and influence I'll leave at the door. My actions will make this church grow. Impartial and studious, I am the watcher to all. For accessibility and inclusion, I will toil. So shall it be.
So shall it be. Thank you, Dan.
So thanks,
I
Dwayne.
really appreciate that thing. Sorry. Over to you.
No, I appreciate you sort of inviting me along to help out. And yeah, Dwayne and I have been friends and work colleagues for quite a few years now. And Dwayne as an individual is to me has been quite an inspiration and just sort of helped me in my day-to-day life. And he's sort of helped me out in a lot of ways. And so it's the least I can do is sort of help out. And I think your message is a really strong one. And yeah, I wish all the success, and we'll do everything possible to grow this community.
Of course. Thank you. Now, the Watcher is one of many roles that we've created within this space. Why? Because if you really want to drive change, you need to be organized. If you really want to make accessibility inclusion something possible in this world, you need to be able to lean on people's strengths and leverage the entire community to drive that. So within this space, we have created roles and responsibilities. The Watcher is an important one because they help us coordinate our actions and keep us honest. There's a line in there about being honest and blunt, being blunt in our truth. So they will always reflect the fact that we were either off course or we're on course. And in that space, we have created other roles. We have created things like artisans, people who make beautiful pieces of art, artifiers, people who make items. Now, myself, for an artifier, for me would be someone who'd make my legs. And we want to honor those people who do great work for this community. We have things like bards. Now, a bard is a musician. And we were going to start off this situation with a bard of diffability. And it is the Blue Mountains Watcher. And I will drop a link in the chat showing you how his hauntingly good work. And we hope to have him join us on one of these live streams in the future. Now, a bard is an entertainer. Now, how do you change people's perspective of people with disability? Well, you get that out there. You get them engaged in all aspects of life. You get it having them in social media as well as mainstream media. And a bard will help us do that. Now, a carer, we all know what those are. A carer is someone who takes care of a person with a disability or even someone who's elderly, because the two are quite aligned. Now, myself, I am a paladin. I am someone that drives as much as I can to change policy and procedures and try to really make things go across the way. I will read the prayer of the Paladin now. My divine self, I see the world for what it is, a place of inequality and injustice. The accessible future is what I seek. I know to be brave, to be firm as I speak. This is my crusade to bring inclusion to society for the protection of my diffability community. Bless my judgment, make it sound. Bless my voice, may it ring out loud. With my strength, I am their shield. With honor, my influence I wield. When decisions are made to try to drive us apart, I will do my part, for I am a paladin at heart. So shall it be. The other roles within this space are sages. Now, sages are people who do excellent work in the field of disability inclusion, and we will hear from a few of them today. Within the church itself, there will be people like clerics and watchers and knowledge seekers. Anyone who wants to know anything about accessibility inclusion, we brand you as a knowledge seeker because you're looking to find out and change the world. And that is our initial sermon for the day. Now I will pass you across to our sages. Now, a sage is a member of the church who expands the knowledge of disability for the purpose of improving lives. Their symbol is an orb and a staff. Now, to drive the accessible future, what you need are three major things. You need to have a resilient mind, an inclusive heart, and then you will get the accessible future. Now, to guide us through how to obtain a resilient mind, I will introduce you to Mike Rolls. Mike Rolls? Hold on, you are muted again. Let me unmute you. So Mike Rolls is a champion of resilience. I have known him for a few years now, and this guy always finds a way to get people uplifted. He's done a lot of school tours where he has explained to them how to be resilient in the world that they do. Mike, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks so much, Dwayne.
Beautiful. Mike, tell us a bit about your work before we get back onto training people about resilience.
So my work, I guess it's across a couple of different sectors. I do a little bit of corporate work, corporate keynote work. I also do a hell of a lot of work in schools, mostly year 9 to year 12 students. So it's I think it goes without saying, the adolescent years, the later years in high school in general is a really tough time in everybody's life. I think it's a tough one. We're dealing with so much change, and particularly in the modern world as well, where there's a hell of a lot more stimulus, a lot more going on. So people, the need for resilience is incredibly important, and I think that's why I will always be in education. I feel it's a very relevant message, and also I really enjoy the being able to relate to that age group as well, because my life changed when I was 18, and I credit whilst I had a hell of a lot of support, working out how to be resilient and how to build resilience into your life for the long term is a really important part of dealing with change in our lives.
Tell me what happened to you at the age of 18, Mike.
Yeah, so I was very, very, a crazy sports mad, typical teenager. And growing up, I loved sport right the way from when I was a little kid. My dad had a golf club cut in half and turned into 2 clubs just so that I could play golf. And eventually I ended up getting into contact sport. So that was AFL rules football. And I made the decision after a successful season at 18 years old to go across to Tasmania and celebrate the end of the season with a run-of-the-mill football trip. And I went across, and I remember the last memory that I have at that time was giving my mum a kiss goodbye when she dropped me off at a teammate's house. And from there, we were going to the airport. I jumped out of a car, really excited about this trip, grabbed my bags, popped them in the car, and jumped in. And then we went across to the airport. And that was the very last memory that I had. The very next memory I had, I wake up after a 6-week coma back in Melbourne at the Alfred Hospital, and I could barely move. I remember feeling pain right throughout my body and not really being able to work out exactly where it was coming from. I just knew that it was everywhere, and I'm surrounded by beeping and machines and tubes and everything like that going in and out of everywhere, and I really wanted some answers. And I remember just being aware of my family being in the room, my mum, my dad, my brother, and my sister. And they were just staring down at me in this hospital bed in the ICU department at the Alfred with a look that I'd never seen before. It was just one of, I guess, total despair. And I remember trying to ask them what had happened to me, because I had no idea. And I couldn't say anything because I had a tracheotomy tube in my neck. And eventually a doctor comes in and does his best to explain what's happened. He says that I've been very ill and I'm going to be in hospital for a very long time. And I'm kind of aware of that already. So I'm like, thanks, mate. A little bit more information. So he continues on and he says, and then he tells me that I've been very sick. I'm going to be in hospital for a very long time. And unfortunately, I've contracted meningococcal septicemia. Now, I'd never even heard of that before. I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he gives me the really sobering news that I had a sheet across my waist, and I wasn't aware of this at the time. He says, "I'm really sorry to tell you, Mike, but you've lost your right leg below your knee, and half of your left foot's gone as well." I also lost a couple of fingers, skin grafts. I had bleeds in the brain, and my weight went from about 80 kilograms right down to 47 kilos. And that felt almost an instant change. That 6 weeks, I don't obviously, but remember any of that. But being in a coma and then waking up felt like click your fingers, and then that was my reality. So the big question in those early days, apart from the life and death situation of golden staff and these sorts of things, was able to finally get out of the woods in hospital. Then I moved on to rehab, and then it was a case of, well, how do you rebuild your life? How do you navigate catastrophic change? Well, by extension to that, how do we navigate change in general, even if it's small? And I think one of the things that I found early days was I started to slip into a mentality or a mindset that is very unhelpful. And I think we all go there from time to time. And I started to ask a question that wasn't helping me. And it was a question of why me? I remember asking that a lot in those early days in rehab. It took 6 months till I was able to finally go home. And when I did go home, finally got a prosthetic leg on, was able to go home, and then eventually I was able to stand up for a couple of seconds and these sorts of things. But that mentality, that mindset of asking why me, why did this have to happen to me, continued to follow me home. And eventually, through the help of, I guess you could call it tough love, my amazing father, Ian, really pushed me one day where he sort of forced me out of the house, into the wheelchair, into the car, and then drove me down the coast, and kind of like wouldn't take no for an answer. And he took me out in the golf course and shoved a golf club in my hand and made me hit a golf ball. And I thought that I couldn't do it. I was saying no the entire time on the way down. And eventually I was able to hit a golf ball and realized, and he kind of proved me wrong. I was saying there's no way I can do that, and that why me very quickly, thanks to the help of my father, turned into a better question. And I thought to myself that day, if I can hit a golf ball, I know I can't play football. I know that that's never going to happen, but maybe I could get good at golf again, and I could focus my energy and attention onto that. So I started to ask what's next. And I think that's a really great way to think about resilience. I think when we lack resilience, we're asking the wrong question. We're asking why me, and we're looking backwards, trying to change events of the past, which, as far as I'm aware, no one can change. Instead, when we look forward into the future and understand that we are affected by the things that happen to us in life, but not necessarily changed for the worse, I realized very quickly that while my life was going to be different in many, many ways, didn't necessarily mean that it had to be bad. And I think that was a great realization from that point. And I guess in a nutshell, when we're talking about, my passion for helping young people and people in general, as a society, we have a massive mental health problem. Half of Australians will experience a mental health illness in their lifetime, and 54% of people will experience a mental illness in any given year. I think it's 1 in 4 in any given year. And I guess young people, by extension to that, there's a lot of people going through a lot when it comes to that mental health, particularly around what's going on this year and the changes we've experienced and the unusual circumstances we find ourselves in. I was reading a statistic the other day around reachout.org. They received 120,000 more calls than they did this time last year. So I think we're only starting to see the effects of isolation and the pandemic start to hit from a mental health perspective. I think that's a really important thing to think about. A lot of the work that I do in schools it was all put on hold immediately, like a lot of people, and that's really unfortunate, because now more than ever, I think we need messages of resilience. It's a quality that we all crave, we all need. We need to work out ways in which we can build resilience and build momentum to get through these tougher times. And I think getting people to focus on that what's next mentality enables them to, I guess, build momentum. And I say momentum deliberately because it's very different to motivation. I think motivation can sometimes, it can be a little bit hit and miss sometimes. Motivation, we can have a lot of it some days, and then other days it disappears, and we don't feel like watching Netflix all day and lying in bed. So rather than thinking about motivation, I like to focus on momentum, and I think momentum is something that we can build by making small incremental improvements on a daily basis and focusing on areas of our life just to get them up and going again. Because when change occurs, any change, we lose momentum. It bumps us off track. So we need to work out how we can build enough momentum to keep us on track and to stay focused.
Beautifully said, Mike.
Yeah, I think this idea of motivation, I think when we lack motivation, we look at it the wrong way around. People think I need more motivation to do the things I want. But in reality, when we think about it differently, I think there's two things that will keep us in a state of momentum and motivation. And that is to be really, really clear on why we do what we do. It's all around purpose, something that compels you to get out of bed in the morning. What goal are you seeking? What large goal are you seeking? And what are the smaller goals that you're going to implement on a daily basis in order to achieve that end goal that you're actually trying to achieve? When you speak to people that don't have a lot of motivation, often it's because they're making it up as they go along. They don't have any structure. And that's the other thing. Motivation is a really important part about building and maintaining motivation, is to be clear on our purpose, and also to be really strict and implement a regular routine in our lives. Having structure builds the ability to achieve those goals, making sure that we're doing things that are consistent on a daily basis rather than being a little rudderless. I think it's a really important, particularly for young people, talking to young people, instilling a real regular routine in their lives, but then getting clear on what they want to achieve in 1 month, achieve in 6 months, and then achieve in 5, 10, 15 years, whatever. You've got to be working towards some major thing in your life. And that is always changing. It's different for every person. I remember in those early days when I was in rehab, as an 18-year-old kid, I had no idea that my largest goal would be sitting on the side of the bed without throwing up. That was a huge goal of mine back in the rehab days. That was a great thing to aspire to. Then it was transferring to a wheelchair, and then it was getting a leg on, then it was standing up for a few seconds, and then it was taking a few steps. So those goals became very trivial, I guess, but they were really integral in paving the way to achieve a better goal, which was many, many years down the track, being able to get healthy again, get fitter, build my endurance, and then eventually be able to play golf, focus on something I could do well. And it's taken me a hell of a long way, and I've been able to have some absolutely incredible experiences as a result of setting that large goal and getting to a point where I guess I wanted to get to in those early days. It really kept me on track.
I love it.
Yeah, sorry, Wayne, go.
Love it. You have summarized the reason to have resilience in space. And the goal now for this organization is the accessible future. Any closing of statements specifically about resilience that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I like to keep it simple. One of the things, there's a couple of things that I really love and I live by. I remember very early days in rehab, my physiotherapist had a lot of tough love to give. I couldn't stand her at the time, I'll be honest with you. I think there'll be a lot of people that can relate to that. She didn't take no for an answer. I don't even think she understood the word no. So every time you'd put any resistance up, she just made you do it anyway. And I think that was great. And I remember I was having a bit of a bad day, and she said to me one day, she goes, "Mike, if you don't like where you are, move. You're not a tree." And I remember that statement being so, I was like, yeah, she's got a point. Sometimes we dwell in a situation and we like to complain about it a lot, but we're not prepared to make a move and to change it. And I think that's a really important a part of it, is you've just got to get on your bike. You've got to keep moving. You've got to move forward, look at the future, and focus on what you want to achieve, and stop looking in the past and wishing your circumstances were different.
Beautiful. Nicely wrapped up there, Mike.
Thanks, Dwayne.
So now we have the tools in our head, how to be resilient. Excellent. Now, to get to the accessible future, I need to have an inclusive heart. And for that, I will defer to Greg Alchin. Now, Greg Alchin, introduce yourself.
I'm an inclusive design consultant. It's, for me, disability, like Mike was talking about, is a lived experience. For I have legally blind in my right eye, and my left eye is a prosthesis. So as we say, blind in one eye, can't see out of the other. But and one of the things that you have to have in an inclusive heart and everything that we do is have a sense of humor, because that's part of being resilient, isn't it, Mike? And
Absolutely.
yeah. Being able to laugh at yourself and laugh at adversity at times. It's helped. For me, it's about inclusion inspires innovation, and innovations in how we live, learn, and work. And that's what it's about. It's finding new ways so that we can all be the best of who we are in whatever environment that we're in, whether it's in a physical space or a digital space. And so I'm lucky enough that I share my time at the moment between Department of Education, looking at trying to improve employment opportunities for people with disabilities. But at the same time, I also have the creative flexibility to work as an independent consultant. And so I get to collaborate with Manisha and yourself, Dwayne. I also work with the United Nations and a range of other organisations, which is great. What's cool is what you learn, you share and reapply to different contexts.
So how do I gain an inclusive heart? How do I make that happen for me?
It's actually really simple. And the two key words are dignity and empathy.
Dignity and empathy.
And empathy. They're our two key words, because for me, an inclusive heart is about the recognition that the decisions that we make actually shape the ability of others, whether it's to access or participate and contribute to on that same basis. So our decisions that we make must include and enable rather than exclude and disable. Now, if that's our goal, then I need to afford people dignity, but I have to have the empathy to understand their areas, their needs, their lives, their issues. And so for me, from a Zen perspective, it comes from knowing what our noble truths are. Our noble truth in that developing that inclusive heart is that diversity is the norm. It's not the exception. That the concept of average is actually a myth.
I'll get you to say that one more time.
Diversity
is the
norm, not the exception.
I love it.
Mm.
Continue on.
That the concept of the average person is a myth. There is no such thing. It's a mathematical concept. That disability is context dependent. You'll see that in our New South Wales Disability and Inclusion Act, because it's the design decisions. It's me with my impairments. When I encounter something, the design of that environment or that situation determines whether I am disabled or not. Not that I have a disability, because when you look at it, you start to go, okay, if I can, for me with my low vision, from my personal needs, go, can I magnify the font easily, or can I change the font size or change things? Is there clarity and legibility and all of those things? If I can participate on the same basis, then am I disabled? No. I'll still have a visual impairment, but if the design of that environment that I am, it's got low light and it's got poor contrast and the text is really small and I can't adjust it, then those design decisions disable me.
So are you talking about the social
model of disability? That's correct, Wayne.
So explain that to us. What is it? How is it different from the medical model?
Well, the medical model basically says, hey, it's your fault. It's your issue. You're on your own. And where the social model realizes that it's our interactions with the environment. And so it actually becomes more of a global responsibility. It also changes the concept of disability, because what we start to look at is permanent, temporary, and situational impairments in that process. And so, for instance, to take a US figure, you've got 26,000 people roughly at the moment on their census data which have a permanent loss of one arm. You've then got another 13 million people that have a temporary impairment because they've had a sporting injury or an accident. You've got another 8 million people which are situationally impaired because they're nursing a child and trying to do a task with one arm.
Okay.
And so that's the other part of our, what I would call our noble truth, is that impairments are a spectrum. The next part for me in getting an inclusive heart is looking at the path that we follow along there. It's based on those emotions of dignity and empathy, but that's where it comes into recognizing, as we all know, that we see exclusion everywhere. But when we learn from people, learn from diversity, learn from people's experiences about how they are interacting with the world, but also what at times their hacks are and their workarounds. When we see those, then we start to come up with better solutions. But when we look at those numbers, we solve for one and we extend to many. And that's the basic 3-step process of inclusive design that's in there. In doing that, it provides us with an inclusive path. But what's our state? What does inclusion look like? For me to have that heart, I've got to have some clarity of understanding about what it is. And for me, it comes from the Design for Dignity retail guidelines. And that's it. That those 4 elements of dignity is that it provides independent access, that it enables equitable access, that it provides participation and growth, but it also provides satisfaction. And satisfaction can be pulled apart to look at our safety and ease, level of engagement and connectiveness. But I have my noble truths, my path, and I have my inclusive state. In that process there, what I'm coming to is that dignity and empathy are in that piece. I have immense responsibility in my decision making. And so I afford dignity. I try to be as empathetic as I can in that whole process because I know the power that my decisions have to include and enable or exclude and disable. And it's not just about disability. We can be looking at gender, we can be looking at age, we can be looking at a whole range of things. But that's the beauty of inclusive design, is that we need to take in all of those issues because, as I think we've said earlier on, we're more than just one element of ourselves.
Yeah.
If you look, yeah, I can talk about my gender. I can talk about being a father or a grandfather. I can be talking about the fact that I love my Irish whiskey, that I love my chocolate. There's a whole range of things about me that make up, and disability or my impairment is only part of that. And yes, I am wonderfully flawed. We're all wonderfully flawed.
Yes, we are.
But yeah, the 2 key words are dignity and empathy for me.
And that's our closeout message. What would you leave people thinking as a final thing? Dignity and empathy is the way to an inclusive heart.
It is, very much so.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Greg. Now, we have resilience in our mind because we'll have 100 barriers to break down as we work our way towards inclusion. And we have an inclusive heart, but now we need to talk about the accessible future. And for that, I have Manisha. Manisha, tell us who you are, what have you done quite recently, and tell us what can the accessible future look like?
Hello, so my name is Manisha Amin and I work for the Centre for Inclusive Design. So when we think about what inclusive design is, I think Greg and Mike have actually talked about some key functions of why inclusive design and what inclusive design is, particularly in terms of the dimensions of inclusive design that Greg talked about. But when I think about an inclusive future, the word future stands out for me. And when we think about future, we think about innovation, right? So we can only create a new world by innovating or changing, stopping something, starting something. And when we normally think about innovation, the way that we think about innovation is based on our own experiences and our past. So I think the message that I have is not necessarily just for people or for people who are people who have experienced disability, but for those who haven't, for people who are, for want of a better word, have the lack of experience of disability, have the blinders or the shutters that come from not clocking when they can't open a door, or when they're struggling with cognitive load. People who discount those things and don't necessarily think about how they lead to innovation. So the beauty of innovation is all around us. It comes from the experiences of not having a product, not having a service, from a design failure. We just need to find the right people to let that innovation in. I guess my first experience of this started when I started working at the Center for Inclusive Design, and we were doing some research on what accessibility really meant and what some of the problems were. And I met someone, I'll call him Bob, because Bob actually came to us and we were talking about what some of people's challenges were, and he was from the Central Coast and he was probably in his 50s at the time, and Bob was telling me how his aim in life, his one goal was to finish a qualification. And I said, oh yeah, so what's the problem there? He said, well, I've started 7 qualifications and I've yet to be able to finish one. And immediately I thought, with my shutters on, I thought, right, it's probably not all of us are made for university. Not all of us are made for TAFE. We need to have the time, as Mike said, what is it we pay attention to? Are we being trees? There are all sorts of reasons why someone might not finish. And I sort of said, oh, yeah, so tell me more about that. And he said, well, I've started a number of courses, and when I start a course, it's fine. But at some point, I'm told I can't continue. See, the thing with Bob is that he was deaf. So the only way he could access a course is if there was an audio describer. His first language was actually Auslan, and if there wasn't an audio describer in the room, he couldn't actually understand what was being said, because it was pre-COVID. So certainly we didn't have the technology and transcription and all these services and captioning that we do now. And basically he'd start courses, and at some point someone would say to him, actually, we couldn't afford an Auslan interpreter, so this course subject is no longer going to be available to you, and therefore you can't complete your course. Really quite terrible. Had nothing to do with him being a tree, had nothing to do with his own motivation. It had everything to do with the system, to Greg's point, the social disability that he was subjected to by the situation that he found himself in. And I remember when I saw...
That would affect him emotionally a lot, wouldn't it?
Completely.
That would affect him significantly.
Imagine how it would affect any of us. And also not just the emotion of not being able to do that course, but the judgment of people like me, right? Thinking that the reason he didn't have a degree was somehow in Australia, where everyone has access to everything, that somehow it was his fault that he couldn't get a qualification. It was his fault that he couldn't have the benefits that a qualification might afford him. And, when I thought about that, it also reminded me of, the same week as I spoke to Bob, I actually went to a conference, and it was an eye-opening conference for me. It was the dullest conference. Sorry, people from ACAN. It was one of the dullest conferences I would have ever had to sit through. It was about accessibility and it was about telecommunications and people's needs around telecommunications. Not something I thought was going to be that interesting. However, it was they designed this conference for everyone. So we had transcription, we had Auslan interpreters, and for once I was actually able to follow along. And I realized even at the most interesting conference, I find it really difficult just to listen to people and to stay focused. But because I had the transcription service, I could actually keep focused, or if my mind wandered, I was able to catch up really easily. I didn't have to just rely on the talking head anymore. And if we'd only just designed everything for someone like Bob, the world would be a much better person for someone like me. Because innovation occurs at the edges. It's not that we're designing something for Bob so that Bob's life is only better, though of course that's important and critical in itself. But actually that sometimes I think we have our ideas the wrong way around. It's not that we design for everyone and then we design for the edges or the people who are forgotten. It's that if we design for the people who are normally forgotten, we're sending love letters to ourselves. And the person who really...
So let me get this straight. So I can be more selfish by being more inclusive.
100%. 100%.
Oh.
And the person who reminded me of that, and my favorite person is a guy called Ed Roberts from the Rolling Quads. Sounds like a band from the 60s. That's because that's when he was around. And Ed is my hero, because what he did was, I have this amazing picture. It comes from Time magazine, I think, and it's in the dark, and there's this person who is a wheelchair user and all these other people who are also wheelchair users with these big placards, and it's the middle of the night, and they're standing next to this sidewalk, and they've got hammers and they're breaking the pavement. Don't do this at home, folks. No, but the reason it's so important is because he was at Berkeley in the 1960s, and he couldn't get from his classroom to his home to the corner shop because of these pesky things called curbs. Okay, and pavements.
Yes.
And so they broke these pavements to say, we need curb cuts, we need ramps in these pavements. And that is the reason, everyone, that we have the ability to get cars into our garages. This is the reason we can have prams and trolleys go down the streets and stop at traffic lights and easily move from one place to another. What's good for the edge is good for all of us. And not only is it good for us, but we cannot innovate without looking at what doesn't work in the world. So let's stop thinking about people with disability or people with lived experience as the poor cousins of the rest of us. And let's start thinking about this as a Trojan horse. How do we design a world that's awesome for all of us? By looking at the people who understand how it doesn't work and who have not only lived experience, but rich experience. So when I sprained my ankle, okay, I have experience of how footpaths don't work for me. But as somebody who is a wheelchair user, they have experience of this that's richer and thicker and denser and far more interesting than me. And in fact, they have more memorable experience. And humans are adaptable. So people who have problems, we adapt and create hacks. Those hacks are how we can create a better world for all of us. Now, if it wasn't for people with carpal tunnel, we might not have had the gesture control that we have with technology today. If it wasn't for people who couldn't see, who were the first users of voice-based commands on technology, we might not have come up with Siri. We might not have come up with electric toothbrushes. We might not have come up with flexible straws. The list of ways that we have worked with people goes on. And I think my biggest light bulb moment was actually working not just with Greg, but one of his friends, a guy called, and now I've forgotten Michael's surname.
Harrison.
Thank you, Michael Harrison, where, you know, when we work with people with different experiences, we learn more. Our lives are enriched, our hearts are open, and we build more resilience. So, you know, I think, and when it comes to those people who go, you know, that's all well and good, but really it doesn't matter. We know through our research, and we did a piece with PwC, that we reach 3 to 4 times the intended audience when we work with different communities. We can unlock $40 billion in GDP. We can unlock 200,000 more tertiary qualifications just by helping people who are in years 10, 11 and 12 from staying at school if they're leaving school because they can't access what they need to access.
Hold on, Manisha, I'll get you to repeat yourself right there. So you said that we have access to $40 billion?
Yep.
And that's which people?
That's just looking at people with disability.
In which part of the world?
So just in Australia. So if we think about it, we're doing a project at the moment for ABC and SBS launching audio description services in Australia, right? And when we think about audio description, it means being able to hear parts of a television show that you might not be able to, that you might miss out on if you can't see. So televisions have the ability to enable audio description. Now think about if you have a TV that can't enable or is difficult to have audio description on it, and this service starts in Australia, are you going to buy a television that can?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, there you go. If you have a choice between a Nokia phone and a smartphone that enables you to hear where you're going, are you going to buy the smartphone?
Smartphone it is.
There you go. So these are just small examples of how we can change it. That's just the buying power of people with disability. If you then look at how those products help people who might not have, so I don't necessarily have a vision impairment, but do I use Siri all the time? Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how the world becomes better for all of us, by thinking about in changing the world, creating a world that's accessible for everyone. And COVID has been a great eye-opener. I used to say to people, how would you imagine designing the most amazing, immersive show for someone who couldn't leave their bedroom. And now all of us are in that situation. And look at what the National Theatre Company is doing. Look at how we are recreating the world. Now, if we'd just done that from the first, right at the beginning, for people who couldn't leave their rooms, this COVID business wouldn't be a problem. We'd have it sorted,
This is
mate.
just the way we'd be living and loving and existing.
Yeah, we'd be going, look at this other level of awesome we've got. So, we could do this. We can use this experience. We have a choice today. And I think my message and my question to all of us is, who are we talking to? Who are we ignoring? Who aren't we speaking to? And who could transform our goods, our services, our products, our technology, our experience if we actually just spoke to them?
It's true.
Not for them, but for ourselves.
So, Manisha, give me a final statement about the accessible future.
It's just there waiting for us. We just need to include people in order to get it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Wow. So, I now have a resilient mind. I know how to be inclusive, and I find out that the accessible future is not only good for people with disabilities, but it's good for everybody, and it's profitable. And I'm wondering, why haven't we got there yet? It's year 2020, right? But we still have a long way to go. We are a small group, and we need to take more people on this journey towards accessibility and inclusion. So in that space, what I will be doing is now reading the prayer of the divine self before we close most of this meeting out. My divine self, I see you as I am, a flawed, unique human. Drive me to seek knowledge, to improve my body and mind. Give me the strength to endure the closed mindsets of the past. Give me the courage to improve the communities I live within. May my mind be resilient. May my heart be inclusive. May I forge the accessible future. So shall it be. Now, the elements of the gathering usually includes a collection. Now, a collection in our space is not, we're not interested in your money. We're interested in your artwork. We're interested in your technology. And you're interested in your policy changes. If you can give us artwork that shows us inclusion and accessibility, we want that from you. If you can improve technology and make that something that is inclusive, we want that from you. And if you can't do those things, fine, then we'll take your money. But that's not what we're after. We want actual change. And money does only this much. What we actually want you to do is be engaged in society to make it inclusive. Now, I want you to get used to saying a certain saying. May your mind be resilient. May your heart be inclusive. May you forge the accessible future. Feel free to use that as part of your existing greeting. When you engage with somebody, change the way you engage, because we can't handshake anymore. So wish them a resilient mind, an inclusive heart, and get them working towards the accessible future. I have been Dwayne Fernandez. We've had Mike Rolls, Greg Alchin, and Manisha. And I would like to thank again Dan Papalo, our first watcher. And we would like to bring this gathering to an end. We will now continue live streaming so we can open up our discussion and have a great chat about access and inclusion and open up the topic. So with that in mind, I will break the spotlight video, and you may leave if you like.
No,
And,
I'm doing an Auslan clap, mate.
Yes. Yay.
Yeah, Auslan claps.
Hey.
Except my hands don't quite work.
And that's the same as me and Dwayne. I'm missing a couple of fingers, so my
man.
claps aren't really
Oh
complete.
yeah, there you go.
Sorry, Greg.
Yes. So
that's
yes,
funny.
I thank you all for all coming. And now I will call out one of the first floors that we have up and running. We don't have live captioning occurring at this first event, right? And we will fix that either in our YouTube video post, and then we'll create a live transcript of this work. But yeah, so let's break this down. How did we do? Do we think we did all right?
Well, Dwayne, you just had a message from someone called Julianne pop up on the screen. Did you see that?
Yes, Julianne.
Oh, there.
I think Julianne's in the Zoom.
So
Yeah.
Julianne,
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna
Hey,
unmute
Julianne.
you. Hi, Julianne. How's it going?
Julianne.
Hi, Julianne.
Just really quickly, it's funny. I just talked to Dwayne yesterday night. Yeah, he reached out on Instagram, and I read a bit of his post on Insta and Facebook. Just briefly, I'm helping out a friend with her startup, so it's also a disability kind of inclusive along the themes of what you're talking about, accessible future. And here I am. It's like, wow, people are moving, people are mobilizing, trying to. Oh yeah, I love it. It's great. Good work.
So yeah, we introduce you to the experts, and we have this Facebook group, and thank you for calling out the Facebook group and the Instagram page. And right now it really is that initial growth stage, right? So with all movements, it has to start slow. It has to be worked through with people going, no, that doesn't work for me, but it does work for me. And I'll give you guys like a very quick story, right? So when we launched this thing on 10th of May 2020, there was only 3 words up on a website. Like before even the website launched, there was an Instagram thing that said Church of Diffability. And there was outrage. Like 3 words up there, and immediately there was hate. And I was like, okay, why is there hate? And that gives me great understanding that with just 3 words, you can influence a positive or a negative experience for people. Just 3 words, right? And the reason we're at church is, and that triggered some people there, and diffability triggered some people there as well.
Mm.
And the reason that did so is because they're like, hold on, why is it not about disability? Why have you not called it the Church of Disability rather than the Church of Diffability? I'm like, it's not only about people with disabilities, and you have articulated that so clearly. It is about all of society coming on this journey where we can nicely engage with each other.
You know, I think one of the things that's really difficult, and I've noticed it particularly in this sector, is people with disability people with a medical disability, let's be clear here, have had to fight so friggin' hard. And when we fight really hard, and when there's not a lot around, it's really easy to end up with a scarcity mindset. And when there's not a lot of money around, what happens is, it's not like we're saying, it's not like you're going, there's this pool of money there, there's abundance, and then, and we're part of that. We're going, the pool's smaller, and in fact, we have to compete with each other for that pool. And what happens is people end up with a scarcity mindset rather than an abundance mindset.
Yeah. It feels like we're fighting with
baggage,
each other.
right? Yeah, and there's baggage associated with that. So I think it comes back to that whole notion of resilience that Mike and was talking about before, in that how do we actually, even in the face of scarcity, go, it's okay to sometimes have different views, different opinions, different ways of talking, and do it with Greg's dignity and respect. How do we have constructive dialogue? I think it's something I've been thinking about a lot. Because it's very easy for dialogue to become destructive very, very fast, right?
It's true. Yeah, guys, tell us your experience in the spaces.
Can I first of all just say to Manisha and Greg, I really loved listening to what you guys had to say, and I just sent you a LinkedIn request because I'd love to stay in touch. Yeah,
absolutely.
no, it was awesome. And
Mike, you're going to be mentoring my son. You realize this?
I hope so. Yeah, and also I just want to congratulate Dwayne on setting it
Very
up.
much so.
I had I learned a lot myself, and I think it's a great. I think there's a lot of fun involved in this too, and I think you're bringing out, it's kind of satirical in a way, but it's people are going to learn a lot of stuff, and if you keep bringing on high caliber speakers like myself not included, of course.
Oh, what are you talking about? You're excellent.
But Greg and Manit, but if you continue this will gain traction really quickly. So I commend you on that, and I hope it goes really well in the future. So that's all I had to say. I thought it worked beautifully. I mean, there's always going to be teething problems when it comes to Zoom. Thankfully, I feel like we're getting a little bit better with Zoom. I'm doing a leadership course at the moment, and we've had 5 days in front of Zoom.
Oh, Lordy.
5 8-hour days.
Oh, wow. That's
so
nuts.
it's been like learning how to run a marathon. It's amazing how fatiguing and how hard it is to actually be in front of technology all day. And I would, whilst it's the next best thing, it's certainly no substitute for face-to-face. But I think we're a long way from that. So we just got to all suck it up. I think you've done a fantastic job with the medium that you've got, and well done.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the work.
Serious chops, mate. And
100%.
Yeah. And what's really cool is, to quote Steve Jobs, it's about making a dent in the universe, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
And but I think we've all talked about, like, I'll come back to about humour. With my prosthesis, we had many years ago a self-help group, and our self-help group was known as Cyclops Circle. And everybody's going, "Oh, you can't call it that." And we said, "Look,
you can.
You can, and we own it, because
that's great.
You've got to have some irreverence there in the name." And it's like we said, we thought we'd like to do a licensing deal with Pro Heart or Jackson Pollock. Because,
I remember Pro Heart.
Yeah. Mr. Hart.
Mr. Yeah.
It's because since you don't have that perception of depth, it's got nothing to do with my sloppy eating habits, but you do happen to spill stuff all the time. So making shirts that have Pro Heart artwork on them, I think, it just hides a multitude of sins. It'd be one of those things. But
nice.
But so there's a good inclusive design, mate. It's like wearing
It's very good.
It's like wearing an RSL club carpet. It hides a multitude of stains and sins in that process.
And just on that quickly, Greg, it doesn't just extend to the visually impaired community. The amputee community has plenty of dark jokes, as you know. Dwayne and I. I know a lot of people that suffered from the same thing, septicemia, that I had, that have lost all their limbs, and they literally have a group that they call the Quad Squad, that they all get together
That's true.
and talk about life and challenges and these sorts of things. And they're an amazing bunch of people. You would have met a few of them, Dwayne.
There's a whole there's Mandy and all the rest of them.
Corinne Barrett.
Yes, man, they're all, and they were on a speaking engagement the other day. And the thing is, what I've noticed is that, with the exception of you, Greg, amputees tend to get a lot more screen time than the rest of the disabilities, unless you got CP, which is now getting a bit more media. And so I think it's on this community to make sure that we're not only talking about ourselves, but getting the rest of the community in. Yeah. And that's kind of what we need to start doing here, right?
I think it's the visible.
We're not divided. Yeah,
no, it's the visible versus invisible disability. So if something's visible, it's a lot easier to tell that it's a disability, because we're visual characters. So we often find that even when when people want to represent disability, they'll often go for a visual cue rather than, sorry, I've got the two cats are fighting now.
But you're right. It is on us who live in who can be clearly seen as the few to talk about the ones who are invisible, right? And it's about making sure the ones who are invisible feel confident enough to say, hey, I'm a person with a disability, and get what they need. And like tomorrow, I will release 2 prayers onto our Instagram page talking about the visible difference prayer and the invisible difference prayer and how they have different impacts on people. But you're right, it really is going, I am different, and how can I make sure society caters for us, right? And there's a lot of tongue in cheek in this.
Well, play is good for business, right? And I think humor is a nice way. It's a serious topic, serious stuff we're talking about, life and death, as you say, Dwayne.
Life and death.
In that instance, the humor is a great equalizer, I think.
Yeah,
I think it also helps people to digest a serious topic.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I do keynotes for corporate and schools, and 90% of the time I'm taking the piss.
Yeah.
Now, it takes something that can, if I could tell it in a way that it would be horrific, and you'd want to go and have a nap afterwards and just forget you ever saw it.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of horrible moments, but people don't really need to hear and see all those details. And I remember clearly growing up, I still remember just being so inspired by the Steady Eddie was the one that sticks out to me. Of a guy that used to just get up there and you're like, well, wasn't he amazing? You just want to go hang out with that guy. Who cares what, what disability he had? And I think humor is, and I know it's hard. Some people don't naturally have, don't have that self-effacing side of things, but I tell you what, it bloody helps.
Tell me about it.
It really does, and I think it helps people to digest it, and it brings you onto the same level. It almost says, okay, look, I'm going to give you permission to have a laugh, and I'm not going to. This is going to be a serious topic, and then people lose that fear of offending.
Yeah,
and I think that's one of the big ones. Is people are terrified of offending, but if they realize you got a sense of humor, all of a sudden it's like, oh. One of my great mates is just brutal when it comes to humor that he says to me, and I'm okay with that. I'm cool. And that's why I think we're so close, is because he doesn't treat me any differently.
It's the dignity piece.
Yeah, I agree.
Dignity doesn't mean eggshells, does it?
No.
Yes.
No, I was just going to say, there's an American comedian, and she has a wonderful, and I can't remember her name, she has a wonderful quote which says, humor is a rubber-tipped sword. You can get your point across without drawing blood.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
That's good. And you can amplify what you've just said, right? Because think about that as a large corporate entity or a state government organization, because they're worried about engaging with us and they're afraid that we're all eggshells. You then just skip it, and then you don't have accessibility inclusion.
Yeah.
And
so we've done research on this. Yeah, Dwayne, we've done research on this. It's about fear and shame. And so, I mean, it's interesting to look at some of the Brene Brown, is it Brene Brown?
Vulnerability?
The vulnerability stuff and the shame stuff. It kind of sits within that that work. But we did some research where we were saying to people, it's your question. Dwayne, I'm not going to start calling you Dwayne. I love it.
Yeah, you can call me Dwayne. It's fine. Everyone does.
But it's, and what we did was we asked people the question about why they don't make things accessible. Okay, especially when they were accessibility advocates, and what they were saying was basically people were worried about saying the wrong thing to people with disability, and because they
need that safe space, right?
Well, what would happen is if I said to you, if I'm worried that I'm going to offend you, I'm going to go, actually, I won't come to the meeting because I might worry you. And so what I'll do, or what I'll do is I'll go, I feel bad. So people will go, I don't want to offend him, so I'm not going to talk to him. I'm going to ignore him or walk past him. And then I feel bad because I've ignored him, because it's really bad to ignore somebody with a disability, which makes me a bad person. So this is where we buy into shame. So then I'll bury my head even further, or I'll reflect my anger on the fact I feel bad onto that person. So in fact, the person with disability is actually being double
alienated
and alienated against because of people's own
fascinating.
judgment. So the minute you use humor,
that's believable.
Yeah.
Is that research that you're talking about? Is that for public consumption?
Yeah, well,
or
look,
not?
we just did it. The problem I've got is we did it to design our strategy, and
Yeah,
this
okay.
came out of it. So we did 3 or 4 lots of focus groups of 10 people, and this came out of that. But I can give you, if you ever want to quote it, just quote it for the Centre for Inclusive Design, and that's fine.
Beautiful.
And then if you want to link it, there's some research that's been done on young people and trauma, that shows what happens when you look at shame and trauma, and then Brene Brown's stuff actually feed right into this.
Yeah, great.
But it's really that thing about fear and shame. When we're ashamed of something or ashamed of ourselves or who we take ourselves to be, we run the other way.
So when our community ends up being this blunt, hard object that you have to deal with us, we could end up with a worse inclusion than ever.
Yeah.
And so we're to call it out, but we do so in a nice jokingly way that they go, okay, fine, we understand we screwed up. How can we get it right later, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what we're trying to achieve with this. But they need to be aware when they've messed up, but we have to make sure that they know that there's room for forgiveness.
Yeah.
But wow, this is a great topic. Oh, go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to say, it's like when I'm discussing with people about writing with clarity, and because that's part of the accessibility guidelines, but it just makes good common sense for everybody. And I just say, guys, whatever you've written, take it to Jenny Craig. It's got to go through a serious weight loss program, because we are too dense in our writing style.
Oh, I love it.
No one's going to read 30 pages, correct? No one's reading 30 pages on accessibility. Just give me 2-pager.
Well, that's right. What do? We go, okay, where's the executive summary? Oh, beauty. Okay. But it's also right if you, it's kind of like Einstein's comment. If you can't, explain it to a child, then you really don't know it.
Yeah.
But it's about clarity. If you've got great clarity, mate, you don't need to write 30 pages.
Looks like we have someone else in the chat. Hi, Lee.
How you doing? How you going?
Not too bad. So Lee works with me, and he's new to our Den network in our workspace. And do you have any questions for the group, or just enjoying the chat?
Just enjoying the chat, mate. Sitting back, relaxing.
Beautiful. Yeah, he's another troublemaker as well. He'll go ahead and do risky things and push things forward. But yes, and I think is there any more topics that we want to raise before I will release you back to your time, because I could endlessly enjoy talking about access inclusions for hours on end. How do we feel? We good? We happy to bring to a close?
Yeah.
Good. Yep.
Thank you.
I want to thank
mate.
you all again for the time that you've given into this space, and I really want to it's just all I have is thanks right now, because I could not have expected a better first meeting for someone that has literally half a page of talk about Mike, resilience, inclusive heart, Greg, Manisha, accessible future. That's like dot points on a Word document over there. I'm really glad that this came together really well, and thank you all for your hard work and your time. And happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day today.
Woohoo! Yeah.
Yay!
Hey, go Gad. Thanks,
Go
Dwayne.
So much. Bye,
Thanks,
Dwayne.
everybody.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everybody. It's
Thanks,
lovely
everyone.
meeting you.
Lovely to meet you all.
Bye.